The air in O'Malley's pub was a thick, sedimentary thing, layered with the ghosts of 1,000 sea stories and the damp, persistent chill that blew off the Elizabeth River. It was a place that clung to the skin and the memory, smelling of stale beer, the sharp tang of industrial cleaner failing to conquer decades of spilled liquor, and the faint, metallic scent of the Norfolk Naval Station just a mile down the road. The low-hanging lights, caged in rusted wire, cast a jaundiced glow over the scarred wooden tables and the faces of the men who filled them. These were faces etched with the hard lines of sea duty, of squinting into the sun-blasted horizon and the green-white glow of radar screens in the dead of night. The ambient sound was a low, masculine rumble, a bedrock of laughter and boasting punctuated by the sharp crack of a cue ball and the tired groan of the jukebox cycling through the same anthems of defiant patriotism. It was a habitat, a carefully balanced ecosystem of ritual and rank, and tonight, like most nights, it was ruled by its apex predator. Petty Officer First Class Mike Jensen, known to all as Bull, was a man built of the same stuff as the destroyers he served on, gray, solid, and radiating a sense of immense, unyielding power. He was a bosun's mate, a master of ropes, anchors, and the physical mechanics of the fleet, and he carried himself with the unshakable confidence of a man whose worth was measured in decibels and sheer physical presence. His arms, covered in a tapestry of faded blue tattoos, were as thick as mooring lines, and his voice was a gravelly roar that could cut through the shriek of a gale-force wind. He sat at the center of the largest table, a king upon a throne of cheap barstools, holding court for a coterie of younger, more impressionable sailors. They orbited him like pilot fish around a shark, basking in his reflected glory, laughing too loudly at his jokes, and mirroring his casual, swaggering contempt for the world outside their uniformed brotherhood. To them, Bull Jensen was the embodiment of the Navy they had imagined. Loud, proud, and afraid of nothing. His authority in this bar was absolute, a thing as tangible and oppressive as the humidity. In a small, shadowed booth near the back, tucked away from the gravitational pull of Jensen's boisterous court, sat a woman. She was an anomaly in this environment, a quiet island in a sea of noise. If one were to describe her, the words that would come to mind would be unremarkable or plain. She wore simple civilian clothes. A soft gray sweater that was neat but not fashionable, dark jeans, and sensible, flat-soled shoes. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, functional knot at the nape of her neck, with a few stray strands escaping around a face that was intelligent but not classically beautiful. There was a stillness about her that was profound, almost unnatural. While the rest of the bar was a study in restless motion, she was a fixed point. She nursed a single glass of club soda, the condensation tracing clean lines down its side, and her gaze was steady, observant, sweeping over the room with a calm, dispassionate curiosity. She did not look like she belonged, yet she showed no signs of discomfort. She was simply present, a cipher in a room full of open books. This woman, this quiet observer, was Dr. Eris Thorne. The title was accurate, but it was a descriptor as inadequate as calling a hurricane a bit of wind. Her mind was a place of quiet, brutal efficiency, a landscape of probability models, stress test simulations, and cascading failure analyses. She saw the world not as a series of events, but as a complex system of interlocking variables, each with a calculable point of failure. The raucous noise of the bar did not register to her as chaos, but as a predictable pattern of human behavior, a social algorithm running its nightly course. She was here for a simple reason. Her husband, a Master Chief in the SEALs, was due back from a deployment. His transport was delayed, and this was the designated, if unpleasant, rendezvous point. So she waited, content in her own thoughts, a lioness resting in the shade, utterly untroubled by the yapping of jackals at the edge of the clearing. The delicate balance of the ecosystem was disrupted by a clumsy gesture. A young seaman, emboldened by alcohol and his proximity to Bull Jensen, stumbled backward, catching the edge of Eris's small table. Her glass of club soda tilted, wobbled, and then tipped over, sending a cascade of ice and fizz across the dark wood and onto the floor. The sound was negligible, lost in the bar's overall din, But the seaman froze, his face a mask of drunken panic. Bull Jensen's head swiveled, his eyes locking onto the small disturbance. He saw the spilled drink, the flustered young sailor, and the woman in the booth. His world was one of clear hierarchies and immediate corrections. An error had been made, and an apology was required. But then he saw her reaction, or rather, her lack of one. Eris Thorne did not gasp. She did not jump back. She did not glare at the sailor who had caused the mess. She simply looked at the small puddle on her table with a detached, analytical gaze, as if it were a minor data anomaly. She then reached out, picked up a napkin, and began to calmly, methodically, sop up the liquid. This was not the expected response. In Jensen's experience, civilians, especially women in a place like this, were supposed to be flustered, perhaps a little intimidated. Her quiet, self-contained competence was a disruption to his worldview. Felt like a challenge. His ego, a vast and fragile thing, interpreted her calm as disdain. He heaved himself to his feet, the legs of his chair scraping a protest against the floor. The laughter at his table died down as his acolytes sensed the shift in his mood. Authority, in its basest form, radiates like heat from a furnace, and every sailor in that room felt the temperature rise. He swaggered over to her booth, planting his massive hands on her table, leaning into her personal space. The smell of beer and cheap cologne washed over her. "Hey!" he growled, his voice a low rumble meant to intimidate. "My guy made a mess. You got a problem with that?" He was not offering an apology. He was demanding a confrontation. He was baiting her, expecting fear or anger, a reaction that would validate his dominance. Eris finished wiping the table. She folded the damp napkin into a neat square and placed it beside the empty glass. Only then did she lift her eyes to meet his. Her gaze was not fearful. It was not angry. It was something far more unsettling. It was clinical. It was the look a biologist might give a specimen under a microscope. "There is no problem," she said, her voice even and clear, devoid of any emotional inflection. "There was a spill. It has been cleaned. The event is concluded." Her response was so unexpected, so completely outside the script he had written in his head, that it momentarily stunned him. He had come looking for a fight, or at least a satisfying display of feminine deference. He had received a dispassionate after-action report. The other sailors were watching, and Bull Jensen could not abide being thrown off balance. He doubled down, his voice growing louder, laced with a sneering condescension. "The event is concluded? Listen to you. What are you, some kind of lawyer? You think you're too good for this place?" He gestured around the bar. "This is a Navy bar, lady. We have rules here. You show respect." "I am showing respect," Eris replied, her tone still unervingly level. By not escalating a non-issue, she made a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture towards the young seaman who had spilled the drink, a gesture that conveyed both dismissal of the offense and a hint of pity for his predicament. This, to Jensen, was the ultimate insult. She was pitying one of his men. She was treating him, Bull Jensen, like a child throwing a tantrum. His face flushed a deep, mottled red. His friends, sensing their leader's fury, began to close in, flanking the booth, cutting off any potential exit. They were a pack, moving in unison, their expressions a mixture of drunken belligerence and mob mentality excitement. The atmosphere in the bar grew thick and heavy with unspoken violence. "You think you're smart, huh?" Jensen snarled, leaning closer, his face just inches from hers. "Sitting here all quiet, judging everyone. You're just another one of these little sea bunnies that hangs around the base, hoping to snag a real man." He looked her up and down with theatrical disdain. "You're a little plain for that, sweetheart. You need to learn your place." Eris did not flinch. She did not turn. Her posture remained unchanged, a testament to a discipline that was utterly foreign to him. She was a statue in the heart of a storm he was creating. This infuriated him more than any scream or plea ever could. Her calm was a mirror, and in it, he saw only his own brutishness reflected back. He needed to break it, He needed to force a reaction to prove that he was in control. He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the soft fabric of her sweater. It was not a painful grip, not yet, but it was a clear violation, a physical assertion of power. "I'm talking to you," he hissed. Still, she did not struggle. Her eyes dropped from his face to his hand on her arm, and then back up to his eyes. The clinical detachment in her gaze was now tinged with something else, a flicker of what looked like disappointment. It was the look of a teacher watching a promising student fail a simple test. "Let go of her arm, Bull," a voice said from the bar. It was the old, grizzled bartender, a retired chief who had seen 1,000 nights like this one. He was polishing a glass, his movements slow and deliberate, but his eyes were fixed on Jensen. "She ain't bothering nobody." Jensen shot him a venomous glare. "Stay out of this, Pops. This is Navy business." He turned his attention back to Eris, his grip tightening. He gave her a little shake. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Who you waiting for to come help you?" He let out a short, ugly laugh. "What? You waiting for Superman to come save you?" His two cronies snickered and moved in closer, effectively restraining her, their bodies blocking her into the booth. One of them put a hand on her shoulder, pressing down. It was a classic intimidation tactic, designed to make a person feel small and helpless. They were waiting for the tears, the pleading, the fear that would satisfy their leader's ego and end the confrontation. They were waiting for the standard human response. They were not prepared for what they got instead. At that exact moment, a sound cut through the bar, a sound so alien and piercing that it silenced everything. It was a high-frequency screech, an electronic shriek that emanated from every corner of the room at once. Every sailor's phone, and the small television above the bar, lit up with the stark, block letters of the emergency alert system. The message was not a weather warning. It was a port condition Zulu alert, the highest possible level of emergency, reserved for imminent catastrophic threats to naval assets. Before anyone could fully process the text, the world outside the bar's grimy windows seemed to tear itself apart. A roar, deeper and more visceral than thunder, shook the building to its foundations. It was the sound of 1,000 tons of steel groaning in torment, the shriek of metal on metal, and the concussive blast of a massive electrical failure. The lights in O'Malley's flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the room into a near-total darkness, broken only by the eerie, pulsing glow of the emergency alert on dozens of phone screens. A collective gasp went through the room. The sailors, trained for crisis, were momentarily paralyzed by the sheer unexpectedness of it. Their training was specific, compartmentalized. This was something else entirely. This was chaos. Bull Jensen, like everyone else, was frozen. His hand was still on Eris's arm, but the aggression had vanished, replaced by a primal confusion. The world had just tilted on its axis. The petty drama he had manufactured was instantly rendered meaningless. A child's game interrupted by an earthquake. In the flickering darkness, he saw sailors scrambling, shouting questions, their voices tight with a mixture of training-induced adrenaline and genuine fear. Their loud confidence from moments before had evaporated, replaced by the uncertainty of men suddenly adrift without a clear chain of command or a known protocol. They were loud, but they were ineffective. They were reacting, not responding. In that moment of universal paralysis, Eris Thorne moved. It was not a frantic scramble or a panic jerk. It was a shift, an activation, with a fluid, economical motion that spoke of a deep, ingrained physical discipline. She broke Jensen's now limp grasp on her arm. She slid out of the booth, her movements precise and silent in the gloom. The two sailors who had been boxing her stumbled back, not from a push, but from the sheer, unexpected force of her purpose. While they were still trying to understand what was happening, she was already 3 steps ahead, her mind processing the cacophony of external stimuli, the sound, the specific type of power failure, the nature of the alert, and assembling it into a coherent threat assessment. She pulled a small, ruggedized satellite phone from her simple, unassuming bag. It was a piece of equipment that no civilian, no sea bunny, would ever have a reason to carry. She flipped it open, and the small screen bathed her face in a cold, blue light. Her fingers moved over the keypad with a speed and certainty that was mesmerizing. She was not dialing a number. She was inputting a secure access code. The bar was filled with shouts. What the hell was that? Generator blew at the substation. No, that sounded like a collision. Rumor and speculation spread like wildfire in the darkness. A chorus of panicked guesswork. Then Eris spoke, and the voice that emerged was not the quiet, even tone she had used with Jensen. This voice was a weapon. It was honed, sharp, and utterly devoid of hesitation. It was a voice of pure, unadulterated command. Oracle to Trident command, authentication code Zulu 9er Echo 7. I have a priority 1 traffic override. Acknowledge. The silence on the other end was less than a second. A calm, professional voice, clearly that of a high-ranking officer, crackled back through the sat phone speaker. Trident acknowledges, Oracle. We have you 5x5. Go with your traffic. The entire bar, which had been a mess of panicked shouting, began to fall silent. Heads turned in the darkness toward the calm, authoritative voice. The name Oracle hung in the air, a word of immense, unknown weight. Bull Jensen stood dumbfounded, his mind struggling to reconcile the plain woman from the booth with the voice now calmly overriding the entire naval command structure. Eris began to speak, and it was as if she were speaking a foreign language, a dialect of pure, concentrated expertise. Initial assessment: primary power failure at the Thimble Shoal substation, likely cascade effect from a primary transformer explosion. Concurrent acoustic signature suggests a large vessel collision or elision within the channel. Port condition Zulu indicates a high-value asset is threatened. Cross-reference tidal charts for 2,200 hours with the outbound shipping manifest. I need a real-time plot of the USS Wyoming. Confirm her status. Now. She paused, listening to the response, her expression unreadable in the blue glow. The USS Wyoming. A name that sent a jolt of ice through every sailor in the room. The Wyoming was an Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine, a silent black leviathan carrying more destructive power than was unleashed in all of World War II. She was docked at Pier 17, undergoing final systems checks before heading out on patrol. A silent, precious, and monumentally dangerous asset. Command confirms. The voice on the phone said, a new urgency in its tone. Container vessel Star of Shanghai has lost all power and steerage in the channel. She is adrift, and her current drift vector, factoring for the outbound tide, puts her on a collision course with Pier 17. Estimated time to impact is 19 minutes. 19 minutes. 19 minutes until a 30,000-ton container ship, dead in the water and pushed by the relentless tide, would slam into a docked nuclear submarine. The potential outcomes ranged from a multi-billion-dollar disaster to a radiological event that would make Chernobyl look like a small fire. While the other sailors were still absorbing the sheer horror of this information, Eris was already in motion. She grabbed a cocktail napkin from a dispenser on the bar, pulled a pen from her bag, and in the dim light of her phone, began to sketch. She drew the pier, the submarine, the drift vector of the container ship. She drew arrows indicating the direction of the wind and the powerful pull of the tide. It was not a doodle. It was a battlefield map. Get me a direct link to harbor operations and the pilots on duty. I need bollard pull ratings for every tug in the vicinity. Prioritize the Dauntless and the Patriot. I need their current positions and their maximum sustainable tow speed against this current. Simultaneously, I want the senior reactor officer on the Wyoming on a secondary channel. Advise him to begin preliminary preparations for an emergency reactor scram on my authority. Do not execute until I give the word. We do not scram a reactor unless impact is unavoidable. The thermal shock is too great. Her commands were a cascade of complex, interlocking instructions. She was not asking for permission. She was not suggesting a course of action. She was single-handedly taking control of the entire port's emergency response. She was playing chess on a board the size of a harbor, with tugboats and submarines as her pieces, and the opponent was physics itself. The men in the bar, including Bull Jensen, were no longer sailors or fighters. They were spectators. They were a silent, awestruck chorus watching a master at work. They could not comprehend the specifics of her commands, but they could understand the absolute, unshakable authority with which they were delivered. This unassuming woman was conducting a symphony of salvation from the sticky floor of a dive bar, using nothing but a sat phone, a napkin, and a mind that could see the future 19 minutes away. The minutes bled away, each second stretching into an eternity. Eris's voice was the only constant, a calm, precise metronome in the heart of the crisis. She directed the tugboats, her language a stream of nautical and engineering terms that left the bosun's mates in the room staring in slack-jawed wonder. Dauntless, make your approach on her port quarter. Use a bowline, not a towline. I need you to pull her stern into the current, not fight it. Use the tide as a rudder. Patriot, you will take up a pushing position on her starboard bow. Your job is not to stop her, it is to deflect her. I need to alter her trajectory by 3 degrees. That's all we need. She was a surgeon, performing a delicate operation on a patient the size of a skyscraper. The background noise from the phone was a tense but controlled flurry of acknowledgments. Copy, Oracle, Roger, deflecting course by 3 degrees. Reactor officer standing by for your command. Ma'am, the word ma'am, cut through the air. A formal signifier of respect that seemed utterly incongruous with the setting. Bull Jensen felt the world he knew dissolving around him. His entire sense of identity was built on a foundation of physical strength, loud confidence, and a rigid, simplistic understanding of the chain of command. He was the bull, the strongest animal in the pen. But he was now watching a creature he couldn't even classify, a being who wielded a power he couldn't comprehend. Her strength wasn't in her muscles. It was in her intellect. Her authority wasn't worn on a uniform collar. It was an intrinsic part of her being. He had grabbed this woman's arm. He had called her a sea bunny, he had threatened her. The memory of his actions now felt like a hot spike of shame being driven into his skull. He felt small. He felt foolish. He felt, for the first time in his adult life, profoundly and utterly out of his depth. Vector change confirmed. Oracle. The voice on the phone reported. The Star of Shanghai has cleared the pier. She is proceeding to a controlled grounding on the soft mud of the western bank as per your instructions. Collision averted. I repeat, collision averted. A collective, shuddering sigh of relief went through the bar. It was as if the room itself had been holding its breath for the last quarter of an hour. The crisis was over. The catastrophe had been prevented. And then the bar doors burst open. The sudden intrusion of harsh, white light from tactical flashlights momentarily blinded everyone. Framed in the doorway was a team of men who moved with the fluid, predatory grace of true hunters. They were clad in black, bristling with the sinister geometry of modern combat gear. They were SEALs, and they radiated an aura of lethal competence that made even Bull Jensen's bravado seem like a child's tantrum. They swept the room with their weapons in a single, practiced motion, their eyes assessing every shadow. Leading them was a man who seemed to have been carved from naval history itself. He was a Master Chief Petty Officer, his rank insignia barely visible in the gloom, but his bearing was unmistakable. His face was a roadmap of hard-won experience, his eyes holding the cold, steady calm of a man who has looked into the abyss and not blinked. This was Master Chief Alex Thorne, Eris's husband. A slow, stupid grin spread across Bull Jensen's face. Relief washed over him, a chance to reassert his shattered worldview. This he understood. Here was the big, tough husband, the SEAL operator, Superman arriving at last. He thought, he's here for her. He's here to save his little wife. He braced himself for the confrontation, a man-to-man affair he could understand. But the Master Chief did not look at him. He didn't even seem to register his existence. His gaze, and the gaze of his entire team, swept the room until it found the one person they were looking for. His eyes locked on Eris. He strode forward, his men parting the frozen crowd of sailors like a ship's bow through water. He did not walk with a swagger. He moved with a purpose that was absolute. He came to a perfect, formal halt exactly 3 feet in front of Eris, who was just lowering her sat phone. And then the world ended for Bull Jensen. The Master Chief snapped to the sharpest, most rigid position of attention Jensen had ever witnessed. His back was ramrod straight, his chin tucked, his eyes locked forward. He raised his hand in a salute so crisp it seemed to cut the air. His voice, a deep and powerful baritone accustomed to command on the battlefield, boomed through the now tomb-silent bar. "Dr. Thorne, Master Chief Thorne reporting as ordered. Trident Tactical is on station. Your orders." The words descended like a physical weight, crushing the last remnants of Bull Jensen's reality. "Dr. Thorne, reporting as ordered. Your orders?" He was not her savior. He was her subordinate. Superman didn't come to save Lois Lane. Superman came to take orders from his commanding officer. The name, spoken with such reverence, finally clicked into place in the minds of the older sailors in the room. The whispers started, spreading through the crowd like a shockwave. "Thorne? The Dr. Thorne? Oracle. They call her the Oracle. She's the head of Stratsys." The legend was being named, the myth taking form in a grimy Norfolk bar. The narrator's voice would have explained it then, for all to understand. This was not simply Dr. Eris Thorne, a physicist. She was the civilian director of the Navy's Strategic Systems Directorate. A ghost in the machine, a name known only in the most classified circles. She was a prodigy who had earned her doctorate at 19 and had been recruited into a think tank so secret that it technically did not exist. Her mind was a designated national asset. She designed the fail-safes for nuclear reactors. She wrote the response protocols for unthinkable disasters. She modeled the outcomes of global conflicts. Her call sign, Oracle, was not hyperbole. It was a simple statement of fact. She saw the patterns others missed. She predicted the failures before they happened. In a situation like the one that had just occurred, a complex, multivariable crisis involving a high-value strategic asset, her authority, by direct presidential directive, superseded that of every uniformed officer in the theater of operations, up to and including the fleet admiral. She was the final backstop, the ultimate failsafe. And Bull Jensen had put his hands on her. Eris looked at her husband, and for the first time, a flicker of warmth entered her eyes. "Secure the area, Master Chief. Get me a damage report from the pier and coordinate with base security." "Good work getting here so quickly." "Roger that, ma'am." He dropped his salute, turned to his team, and began issuing quiet, efficient orders. He had not spared a single glance for the man who had assaulted his wife. In his world, Bull Jensen was not a threat. He was an irrelevance, a piece of faulty background noise. With the crisis managed and her team in place, Eris Thorne finally turned her full, undivided attention back to the man who had started it all. She walked slowly towards Bull Jensen, who stood frozen, his face the color of wet cement. He looked like a man who had just watched the ground open up beneath his feet to reveal the churning gears of the universe. Her voice, when she spoke, was back to its quiet, clinical tone. There was no anger, no triumph, no "I told you so." There was only the calm, inexorable logic of a final report. "Petty Officer Jensen," she began, "your primary failure tonight was not your disrespect. That was merely a symptom of a much deeper, more dangerous flaw. Your failure was one of intelligence gathering and threat assessment." She took another step closer, her gaze pinning him in place. "You made an assumption based on incomplete and biased data. You saw a small woman in civilian clothes in a military environment, and your cognitive bias immediately classified me as other, weak, and insignificant. You did not pause to consider why someone who looked so out of place would be so perfectly calm. You did not ask questions. You did not observe. You proceeded directly from a flawed assumption to a kinetic engagement." She gestured back towards the now active scene outside, where floodlights were cutting through the night and the sounds of official activity were growing. "Tonight, your tactical failure was directed at me, and the consequences were limited to your own humiliation. But what if a situation like this occurred on your ship at sea? What if you mistook a critical plainclothes intelligence officer for a civilian contractor? What if you dismissed a warning from a female engineering expert because you assumed she didn't know what she was talking about? Your inability to see past a uniform or a gender is not a personality flaw, petty officer. It is a critical vulnerability. It is a flaw that can get people killed. Her husband stepped up beside her, his presence a silent, menacing monolith. His gaze fell upon Jensen, and it was filled with a cold, professional fury. He looked at Eris. "Ma'am, shall I have him taken to the Master-at-Arms? The UCMJ articles are numerous." Eris held up a hand, a gesture that stopped the formidable SEAL Master Chief in his tracks. "No, Alex. The brig would be a waste of time. He doesn't need punishment. He requires re-education." She looked directly into Bull Jensen's terrified eyes. "Petty officer, as of 22:30 tonight, you are hereby reassigned under my discretionary authority. You are now my new Special Projects Liaison. Your duties for the next 24 months will consist of carrying my briefcase, setting up my projection equipment for briefings, and standing in the back of rooms filled with admirals and senators while I work. You will listen, you will observe, and you will learn to see the entire board, not just the piece directly in front of you. Is that understood?" Jensen could only manage a choked, strangled nod. His voice, the booming instrument of his dominance, had utterly failed him. "Good," Eris said. She turned away, her attention already moving on to the next problem, the next variable. "Master Chief, my bag." Alex Thorne walked over to the booth, picked up the simple, unremarkable bag that had held the sat phone, and handed it to the pale, trembling Bull Jensen. The transfer was a symbolic passing of the torch, a ritual of humiliation and rebirth. Jensen's life as the king of O'Malley's was over. His education was about to begin. The story of that night passed into the permanent lore of the Norfolk Naval Station. It became a modern fable, a teaching tool passed down from salty old chiefs to wide-eyed recruits. It was called The Night the Oracle Came to O'Malley's, or sometimes, more simply, Bull Jensen's comeuppance. With each telling, the details grew more mythic, the stakes more dramatic, but the core truth, the essential lesson, remained unchanged. Years passed. The world turned. In a sterile, well-lit classroom at the Senior Enlisted Academy in Newport, a group of the Navy's best and brightest Chief Petty Officer Select sat listening to their instructor. The instructor was a Chief Warrant Officer, a man whose face was lined with a quiet wisdom that had clearly been earned the hard way. He was fit, his uniform immaculate, his bearing professional. But there was no swagger in his posture, no boastfulness in his voice. He spoke with the quiet, measured confidence of a man who knows his own limitations. "Your biggest enemy out there," Chief Warrant Officer Mike Jensen told the class, "is not the Russians. It's not the Chinese. It's not a terrorist in a speedboat. Your biggest enemy is your own assumption. It's the little voice in your head that tells you that you already know what's going on, that you can judge a person by their cover." He paused, and a sad, knowing smile touched his lips. "Let me tell you a story about a night in a dive bar in Norfolk. It's a story about a loud, arrogant bosun's mate who thought he was the toughest guy in the room. And it's about the 5'5" woman in a gray sweater who was holding the fate of the entire Atlantic Fleet in the palm of her hand." He used his own story, his own moment of profound and public humiliation, as his greatest teaching aid. He had been transformed. 2 years of forced proximity to the quiet, relentless genius of Dr. Eris Thorne had stripped him of his arrogance and rebuilt him from the ground up. He had learned that true strength was not loud. It was effective. True authority was not demanded. It was earned through competence. He had become one of the most respected instructors at the academy, a man known for his humility and his fierce dedication to teaching the next generation of naval leaders how to see the world as it truly is. The moral of this story, the lesson that echoed from that dingy bar to the halls of the Naval Academy, is a simple and timeless one. Do not judge a book by its cover. Do not mistake quiet for weakness or loudness for strength. Substance will always, eventually, triumph over style. The most dangerous person in any room is rarely the one making the most noise. It is the one who is watching, listening, and thinking. It is the one who does not need to announce their power, for they know that when the moment of crisis arrives, their actions will be their only necessary argument. Let your competence be your roar, and let your achievements be your armor. In the final, brutal calculus of reality, that is the only strength that truly matters.